You're looking at the big picture with Edwin Eisendrath on WCPT 820.
Ezra Levin is not sitting on his hands. He is not waiting for the Trump administration to ruin everything we love so that voters will turn out for Democrats. Nope. Nor is he patient with those who fail to understand that in a democracy, even one as threatened and as challenged as ours, everyone has agency. Everyone can make a difference. He is also, of course, the co-founder and co-executive director of Indivisible, a movement that has spread across the country and is now one of the biggest pro-democracy movements, ever. Ezra, welcome back.
Hey, great to be here again. Always nice to have a conversation with you.
So you and Leah, your wife and partner at Indivisible, now host weekly webinars. I was on one of them, and I just want to thank you for doing them. How are they going?
Oh, God, I love it. I got to say, I really love it. And we recently figured out these are mainly Q&As. This is chats with the movement, and we try to make them authentic and real and dig into how do we build up a pro-democracy movement in this country? How do we deal with messaging issues, tactical issues, strategic issues? How do we organize with people we don't 100% agree with on everything, but agree that this is a crisis? It started, we started these last year. We had maybe 300 people join, and it was a friendly conversation among the tip of the spear, the people who were leading groups on the ground. And gosh, we had about 10,000 people register for the last one. And so it's become actually kind of a complicated system of how do you take in questions from thousands and thousands of people. But we instituted a new system where you can just vote. People submit questions. You vote in real time on what are you most interested in? And then we just go through and we have discussions. And I thought it was a frank and wide-ranging conversation. Some of it was questions about, why are we pushing for this or not pushing for that? How do we deal with Democrats who aren't fighting back as hard? How do we force Republicans who aren't showing up to actually face their constituents? It's the real stuff. This is what it looks like to actually build and wield power. And I love it. It's something I look forward to every single week. And the way they start is people introduce, hey, I'm coming in from Tallahassee. I'm coming in from New York. I'm coming in from Washington. And so you get this sense of this nationwide movement building up. I can't get enough of it.
I think it's fabulous. And you said some of the questions are like, what were the top most interesting questions? Maybe we ought to cover them here.
Yeah, well, so right up at the top, this is coming out of the address to Congress that Trump gave, and there was, I think you would say, a disappointing Democratic response, and folks were upset that not only was Al Green one of few that was thrown out or walked out. There were folks like Maxwell Frost and Jasmine Crockett who walked out, but seemingly looked like a normal affair, more or less, with Republicans cheering and Democrats politely sitting in their chairs. Al Green, who was thrown out, was then censured by the Republicans the next day. But it wasn't just the Republicans. There were 10 Democrats who joined to censure him for making a fuss. And so reasonably, a lot of people on the call were incensed. They were thrilled that Al Green actually stood up. They wanted to see all Democrats stand up with him in solidarity. And not only did they not do that, many of them were siding with Republicans. And reports came out that Hakeem Jeffries, the leader of the Democrats in the House, was organizing behind the scenes to actively dissuade people from making any scene. And for those who did indeed walk out, they were called into the principal's office and given a talking to. There could not be more distance between the grassroots right now and leadership. And that's not where I want to be. I want to be clear. I want a unified opposition movement. And I think the way that we get there is by demystifying for people what is going through their heads right now. Why aren't Dems doing what we want them to be doing? Why are some leaning forward as far as they are, and how can we support them? So a lot of the top questions, we're wrestling with that basic conundrum we're facing. We're not in this to yell at Dems. That's not my goal. My goal is to fight back the fascists who are tearing down our constitutional republic. But we can't do that without a unified opposition party. So I think people are reasonably grappling with that basic. Yeah, they're frustrated and they want to do good, right? They want to have impact. We don't want to just have the right opinions and yell at people who don't have the right opinions. We want to build power and change things. And so when something bizarre or seemingly bizarre and inexplicable happens on the national stage, people are trying to understand what's going on. And we view our role partly as former congressional staff and as a national operation, trying to demystify that and tell people, okay, here's what they're thinking and here's what you can actually do about it. If we all do this, this is how we move towards our shared goal of having a unified opposition party.
Yeah. I'm not sure what the right form of protest in a situation like that where Trump is speaking in a joint session. I'm not sure what the right form of protest is, but I'm quite confident that even if the right form of protest isn't to stand up and disrupt it, it's certainly not a good idea to be voting with Republicans on a censure bill. That makes no sense to me. And to just go the other direction, I thought Alyssa Slotkin was great. I know a lot of people didn't, but like there are a lot of ways to show opposition here. And as you said, we have to have a big tent about how we do it.
Oh, 1,000%. Look, this is not going to be solved by purely activists or purely folks on the left or purely people who voted for Kamala Harris. We need a pro-democracy movement that spans the ideological spectrum, that includes lefties, that includes moderates, includes non-voters, includes Trump voters who are pissed off right now because they're not getting lower prices of bread. They're getting Project 2025 and all the terrible things that entails. So I strongly agree with that. My favorite thing that Slotkin said, I wasn't wild about everything Slotkin said. My favorite thing that she said, though, was organize locally and hold us accountable, including me. I think that's the right message. If you are looking at national leaders and saying, why aren't they doing something? I think that's a reasonable question. But the follow-up question should be, well, what are you doing? How are you organizing? Because it's on all of us to do this work.
Yeah. I mean, Ezra, I think there's a majority in America and that neither the Democrats or the Republicans have had it in ages. The country's been split because the nature of our politics is like micro-targeting and divide. But I actually think there's a majority to be cobbled together somewhere in America, a real governing majority. And maybe it is exactly the one that you're building around democracy.
Well, when we talk to our groups on the ground, and these are not hardened politicos who have been in this work. I mean, these are nurses and teachers and IT technicians. And the number one issue that they are concerned about, although they care about immigration and climate and taxes and education, the number one issue has consistently been democracy itself, a fear that democracy is under threat. Look, our top legislative priority when we briefly had that Democratic trifecta from 2021 to 2022 was passing a democracy bill that would eliminate gerrymandering, that would get money out of politics, that would make voting day a national holiday, that would make it easier for constituents to make their voice heard and make it harder for money to control everything that happens in politics. And it was a campaign that we
not close enough.
Exactly. It came close, not close enough. Manchin and Sinema, two former Democrats, two former senators, neither Democrats nor senators anymore. They killed it. And so we just weren't able to get it done. But that was a wildly popular piece of legislation. Like that wasn't a 51% piece of legislation. If you ask Americans, should we end gerrymandering? You'll get 60, 70, 80% saying, oh, hell yeah, of course we should. What are you talking about? And that's Democrats, Republicans, and independents.
Absolutely. I mean, look at Ohio, where the citizens voted to end it on, on a ballot to change their constitution. Now, the Ohio legislature ignored them, which is a different question. But hey, look, we're seeing a president and administration, a political party in the Republicans shred the Constitution, walk away from the rule of law, switch sides in a war where our nation previously stood for democracy against aggression, dismantle large parts of the government that are actually doing what they're supposed to do, and through it all making decisions that look like they're just profiting a handful of billionaire oligarchs. That wasn't hard for me to say. Why is that so hard for elected Democrats to say?
Yeah, tell me what you really think.
Right? Well, what I really think is, by the way, we'll come back to this question, but what I really think is this tariff nonsense is market manipulation and people are making money out of it because it sure isn't a policy if you put them on one day and you take them off the next.
Oh, yeah. Well, look, I see some people saying something like that. I see that in the House and the Senate. Like I said, leaders like Greg Casar or Maxwell Frost or Jasmine Crockett or Chris Murphy on the Senate side. I think he's doing a pretty darn good job describing the crisis that we're in. So I wouldn't paint with totally like broad brushstrokes here. There are leaders here. And if we're happy with what somebody is saying in Congress or elsewhere, we should be supporting them with our attention, with our subscriptions, with our contributions, and with our supportive actions on the ground. We need heroes in this fight. We really do. And the more that people in other positions of power see those folks getting attention and getting praise, the more likely they are to come over. It is both carrots and sticks. It's carrots and sticks. So when folks do good things worth celebrating, we ought to celebrate them to show that we're not just here to criticize and criticize, but we've also got to be willing to call out our friends and sometimes allies in the Democratic Party when they're falling flat. They need to know that when they're not meeting the bar, there are going to be political and communications and messaging consequences for that.
Yeah, I think that's right. And, while you were talking, I was thinking it isn't just the people when they do right we need to celebrate. I think, and this is, I think, post-Watergate journalism. Americans have not celebrated our government when it does right. And we're now finding out, having built 30 years of skepticism, about 40 years of skepticism about what our government is and what it does. Now that it's falling apart, we're finally going, oh my gosh, they really do a lot of good things. We should celebrate those too.
My background is in anti-poverty policy and advocacy. I started working on homelessness issues and during the height of as the housing crisis got really bad in 2006, 2007, 2008, and then worked on poverty policy in Washington, D.C., both as an advocate and for a staffer for a member of Congress. And one of the real challenges for somebody trying to, increase support or increase the efficacy of government programs or expand them in ways is this concept of the submerged state. Are you familiar with this? This idea that government does so much and it happens largely behind the scenes that many of the beneficiaries of government programs don't recognize that they're benefiting from government programs. I remember the sign, get your government hands off my Medicare. The concern when the Affordable Care Act was being threatened back in 2017, 2018 with folks in red states saying, hey, don't come after my state exchange. Just get rid of Obamacare. Well, your state exchange is Obamacare. That's what that is. And then forget about the folks making sure that nuclear waste is disposed of properly. Forget about people making sure that the planes stay up in the air. These are all things that we just largely take for granted. And unfortunately, it's one of those things where people might not miss it until it's gone, but then they're really going to miss it. And what we need to do in this moment is identify who is to blame for this thing that this terrible condition that we are facing now. Excuse me, my 2-year-old has a cold and now I have a cold. Who is to blame for planes falling out of the sky? Who is to blame for you not getting your Social Security check on time? Who is to blame for your Head Start program being closed? There is somebody who controls the House, the Senate, and the presidency and much of the judicial system.
Yeah,
we
you
need to
Elon?
identify them. Yeah, indeed. I think Elon is a weak link in the chain, and it's a good way to fracture the MAGA coalition because even members of that coalition are concerned about Elon's unpopularity. But I believe we still have a representative democracy in this country. Until proven otherwise, I believe we still have that, which means we need to identify who is fighting for you and who is fighting for the billionaires.
Right. And at the moment, it's a partisan issue. But I think there are some cracks, and we need to lean heavily in them. And you're absolutely right. I love Shakespeare, but I think in Hamlet he was wrong. He said conscience doth make cowards of us all, but it turns out it's politics that makes the cowards. And it's up to individuals to restore some backbone.
There's a form of cowardice and fear that I really appreciate in politics, though. Maybe I'll back into this. Every elected official in this country that I've ever met or ever seen operate wakes up every morning thinking one thing: how am I going to get reelected? That is a healthy fear. That means that you've got some sort of representative democracy where folks have to turn back to their voters and request power for a bit more time. That basic cowardice is healthy. You want to be scared of your constituents. If you're not scared of your constituents, you're not living in a democracy. You're not working in democracy. You can get people to have courage. You've got to organize to get them to have courage. You got to show them that having courage is actually politically advantageous. But you don't just berate them and say, oh, woe is us. We have flawed leaders. They are corrupt. They'll never do the right thing. You might feel good about yourself saying that, but you're not going to achieve any change. You got to recognize that elected officials are human beings that respond to external stimuli like anything else in this world. Are they going to be responding to you? Or are they going to be responding to lobbyists or corporations or the so-called messaging experts inside the DC Beltway? I would rather them respond to you, but they're not going to respond to you individually. They don't care about you individually. Individuals in this country, unless you're rich or super famous, you have very little power. But groups of individuals, those folks have power. If you organize a group of folks, you can actually move these elected officials.
Yeah, Ezra, I'm thinking, as you said that, electeds are thinking about how do I win the next election? And in so many parts of the country, courtesy of John Roberts and the Rucho decision on gerrymandering, one of the answers that politicians make to that question is, I can get reelected if I can pick my voters. Right? I don't have to worry about serving them if I can pick them. And not John Roberts this time, Mike Johnson, I don't think he's ever run in a competitive election. He's never really had to fight for votes. He really doesn't know what this experience of democracy is because he was handpicked in a gerrymandered district. So he really, he had no competition in his primary, and then nobody ran against him.
Yeah, I think that's right. Look, I wrote a whole book with several chapters on this basic feature of the modern Republican Party. I'm from Texas. There's a reason why in Texas, the same year that they banned abortion, instituted one of the most egregious abortion bans in the country, they also gutted voting rights. They knew it was a deeply unpopular position, even in Texas. And their solution for this conundrum, how do you maintain an extremist policy agenda in a democracy? How do you do that? Because eventually the voters are going to vote you out, right? Well, there's a simple solution to that. Make it harder for people to vote. Don't give them a voice. I mean, you have two options. You either moderate or you make it more difficult for voters who don't like you to express their opinions.
Yeah, I teach a class in some of this stuff. And one of the questions I ask my students is, when does the sort of garden variety corruption, the kind that gets aldermen thrown into jail here in Chicago, when does that turn into a threat to democracy? And, you sort of get there when the corruption part figures out that you can corrupt the whole system rather than just to get a parking permit or something.
Look, I mean, democracy is not a binary state. It's a spectrum. We can become more or less democratic, and we do that through vigilance or acquiescence, depending on which side of it you're on. Yeah. Nothing about the democracy we have now should be taken for granted or believed to be just the inevitable outcome of a lot of white guys getting together in the late 1700s. I mean, we have been fighting for a more democratic system and making gains and experiencing losses for the last 250 years. That's been the reality of American democracy.
Yep. Well, and we've never made gains without the population fighting for them. I mean, never. I think of the movements that literally, right? I mean, the labor movement,
literally
movement,
never.
Never.
Give me an example of people in power in an anti-democratic fashion waking up one morning saying, you know what, let's give the people more say. It just feels good on this Tuesday. Let's give the people more say. No, that never happens. The people demand it, and you get a little bit more democratic. That's how it always works.
Every time. Yep. And it doesn't happen quickly. I mean, I think of the 87 years between Seneca Falls and women getting to vote, or the 100 years between those great amendments after the Civil War and the Civil Rights Act that actually, gave people the vote. It takes a long time, but it takes concerted effort.
Look, I mean, the Civil Rights Act of 64 and the Voting Rights Act of 65, those first came together in the late 1800s when, at the time, Republican senators were seeing Southern segregationists deny black populations the right to vote. And they thought, well, we got to do something about that. And the Southern segregationists did not like that. And so they started using the filibuster. They weaponized the filibuster to block any kind of civil rights or voting rights legislation, even anti-lynching legislation for decades. Often these fights take a long time, but the only way you achieve change is by organizing on the ground. These aren't one-off marches. That's not what's going to change anything. It's persistent organizing, building up structures of people power to contend with concentrated wealth and concentrated political power that opposes any change.
Right. And we are definitely in that moment of concentrated wealth and concentrated political power.
Indeed.
I'm going to, we are, just so the folks who are listening know, we're recording this Friday. You're going to hear it Saturday. And later today, I'm going with my son. We're going to a March for Science, rally later today with lots of people from Chicago's a big university town. And the attacks are huge. And, the weather's not so great here yet. I just think that this summer is going to be a summer like we haven't seen in 50 years, with lots of protest everywhere.
Well, we're not waiting for the summer. I'll put on your calendar April 5th, 4/5/25. There's going to be a massive show of force of folks who are opposing Musk and Trump and cowardly Republicans who are hiding from them all over the country. I would expect for it to be the first really big showing all across the country. It's not just Indivisible. Indivisible will be doing it, but also folks like Working Families Party and Move On and the unions and other community groups around the country. It's going to be big, so I would start planning to show up.
All right. I'm going to learn more about that before we air tomorrow, so I can tell people more about it. And it's going to be all over the country, right?
It will be all over the country. Then this is early. We don't have. There's no website out there. This is growing with virality right now. It's spreading across the ecosystem. 5051, which is a beautiful organic movement of folks who have been putting together protests around the country, organized on Reddit without any kind of infrastructure. It's just people are angry and organizing. They're part of it as well. I expect people to show up in a big way and say no to this takeover, no kings, no to the billionaires who are trying to undermine our constitutional republic, and focusing in on not just the policy issues in front of us. Look, I want to fight for Medicaid. I want to fight for Social Security. I want to fight for a budget that actually reflects the will of the people. But this is bigger than a typical political fight around policy. This isn't just a 1990s era, Republicans want to cut services and Democrats want to raise taxes on the wealthy. It's more than that. It's, do we have a constitutional republic or don't we?
Will we ever have a policy fight again?
Indeed. I would love to disagree with somebody like Liz Cheney on social policy or tax policy or education policy. That would be my dream, for us to be on opposite sides of a political fight where we can just understand we have a republic. That is our system of government, and now let's debate the policies. That's not the fight of the day. That is not the defining fight of 2025. The defining fight of 2025 are we an authoritarian government or are we a constitutional republic?
Yeah, I don't understand how it is that there are people who still just think it's normal times. I don't. And maybe it's this shock and awe stuff where there's just so much coming at us we can't tell. I've stopped talking on this show about the one-off things that the administration does, and instead I put everything into the categories that scholars recognize are the signs of strong democracies, or the ones that get undermined in Hungary, and just say, okay, here's one more thing they did to weaken a free press. Here's one more thing they did to undermine NGOs. Here's one more thing they did to weaken voting, rather than just talk about each one itself, because that's just confusing to folks.
Yeah, I think we need a simple message. We really need a simple message, and that message needs to encompass not just folks on one part of the ideological spectrum. It's got to be broad. It's got to be unifying. I want to wrap ourselves in the American flag. I want to have I want to say the Pledge of Allegiance. I want to emphasize that what we are doing is the same thing that the Union was doing in 61 and 62 and 63 and 64 and 65 in the 1800s. Mm-hmm. What we are standing up for is the United States of America against an aggressive authoritarian force. And we're going to win because there are more of us than there are of them.
Yeah, this winter was, to use this same metaphor, but to go back a little further, this winter was our Valley Forge. Are we, the enemies of this fledgling democracy are in full power, and they've occupied New York at the time. They've occupied lots of important places. And, this ragtag group is trying not to freeze to death, but to be ready to fight.
Yeah, we need folks who are ready to fight, and I will emphasize the best way to fight in a moment like this is through effective, broad-based, nonviolent resistance and opposition. That is how you build a majority movement against a creeping authoritarianism.
So let's go back to where we began, because building that movement means supporting the people who are doing it, and again, we had this notion in Congress where our congressional leaders object if we protest impolitely, and I don't know what's in their heads. Can you help? Have you talked to them? Can you understand what that's about?
Yeah, and look, I think it's really important for us to understand the positions of folks who we disagree with strategically, because it doesn't do any of us any good to flatten and say, well, they're compromised and they're bad. They're in the bad category. Because
I don't think they are. I just don't understand them.
Well, some of them might be bad, but it doesn't help you to then organize and bring them over to your side if that's your goal. Because like I said, my goal is not to have the right opinion. My goal is not to righteously raise my fist in feckless fashion and then go home and feel good about myself. My goal is to have a unified pro-democracy opposition movement in the country. And so then you got to recognize there are some people who either disagree about the conditions on the ground, or they disagree about the right strategic play to make, even if they agree about the conditions on the ground. Now, for folks who don't think this is a crisis, I would point to many of the things you've already said, and I won't rehash it. But let's focus on this question of folks who maybe agree that it's a crisis, will say it's a crisis, but will then berate folks who do something like what Al Green did or what some members did, protesting this speech to Congress that Trump gave this week. Here is their strategic analysis as best I can say, and I won't create a straw man. I'll try to give it straight. Their belief goes something like this: yes, this is a crisis, but Trump is relatively popular right now. And because Trump is popular, it would be ill-advised to take him on directly. He is doing unpopular things, and in due time, the public will come to see how unpopular and bad these things are. They will turn on Trump naturally without us getting in the way. And when he is sufficiently unpopular, that's when we can start to attack. That's when we can actually start to organize against him. And then the public will be on our side already. I think that's a fair representation without too much bias there. Obviously, I disagree. And I think I disagree in a key way. I think Democrats in particular have a problem with looking at a simple poll and saying, oh, the people are there. I should stand there with where the people are. Republicans look at a poll and say, oh, the people aren't there yet. I've got to get them there. We're gonna get the people to adopt this position. This is X issue. Trans kids in sports is going to be the most important issue in the country. We're going to make sure everybody believes that. Nobody 5 years ago thought that was the most important issue in the country. And yet Republicans, man, they hammered on it. They push it and they make it a hot topic of conversation just about every day now. I think public opinion is not like the weather. It doesn't just come and go. It's not immutable either. It doesn't just exist and is unchangeable. It is actually the product of normal everyday people looking around and trying to see, where is everybody else? Where are my neighbors? Where's my community? Where's the media? Where are my elected officials? Are they saying it's a crisis? Because if they're not saying a crisis, it's probably going to take me longer to come over to the position that it's a crisis. So I think what you would call bringing public opinion over to your side, I think you'd call that political leadership. And it kind of sucks because you have to take a chance. You have to say something that isn't in the moment deeply popular automatically, but will become if enough people act in that way. And so I think the reason for the strategic disagreement is it's not easy to do that. It's not automatic to do that. There will be some pushback and there is some risk involved. But if you don't want to lead, if you don't want to take on that risk, I don't think you should be occupying that position of leadership.
Yeah.
That I think is the key strategic difference. And so why you see some folks behaving in that way, I don't actually think it's necessarily that they are bad or they're corrupt in some way. It's not that. There's a legitimate strategic difference. And then how do we work through that? We've got to demonstrate that the people are demanding leadership. We've got to organize so well across so many geographies and so many constituencies that the folks in leadership positions say, oh my gosh, we've got to do something. They are going to come after us if we don't do something. So we've got to start leading.
And look, the people in politics must notice. I mean, my governor in Illinois has spoken out. He's decided it's okay to take this guy on. And he hasn't done it a lot, but every time he has, people are talking about it. He's getting a lot of praise for it. That kind of thing matters to people in politics.
Look, you don't get involved in politics if you like to be booed. You get involved. You run for office because you like to talk to crowds and be cheered. Of course it matters. These are human beings who decided to devote their life to giving speeches and to talking to people. They want love. They're looking for support. Give it to them when they do the right thing.
Yep. All right. So just tell everybody again how they get involved, and then you can get healthy again and get back out there and I'll go to this rally.
Apologies for my voice. Number one thing, do not just consume media in this moment. It's good that you're learning and listening to this, but I have a real bias towards action. You are not going to solve this problem that we're all facing by doom scrolling or watching or listening to the news. You can get educated from that, but you got to then take the next step and take action. And the single best action that you can take in this moment is to find a community of folks geographically near you, in your community, that are goals aligned, that also agree this is a crisis and also would like to do something. Now, what that something is, it could be mutual aid in support of trans kids under attacks or refugees or immigrants who are being threatened. It could be organizing to get somebody better in office. It could be organizing to push an elected official or a Republican or a Democrat. Your leverage and your power is going to be different depending on where you are and what your political geography looks like. Those opportunities are going to be different in Arkansas than they are in New York City, than they are in Austin, Texas. So you're going to have to use your brain, pay attention, identify where the opportunities are. You're going to do that best with a group of other people. Now, that's what Indivisible does. There are 1,500 local Indivisible groups all around the country that are run by volunteers like you who decided, I guess today's the day I got to do something. But if Indivisible doesn't scratch the itch for you, that's fine. Find the community that does. Find the thing that will get you to show up every week with a group of people and organize. And from that, the sky's the limit.
That is a great way to end. Thank you, as always, Ezra, for joining us on this show and sharing what you do, but also for Indivisible and this impactful and important leadership in this moment.
Of course. No, happy to talk anytime. Look, it is important that all of us make clear that the folks who are attacking our democracy, are not all powerful. They do not hold all the cards. If we organize, we do indeed have more power than them. And people are going to learn about that if we're talking about it. So I'm happy to talk anytime.
Great. Thank you so much.